This graphic has been placed on my page and given a text wrap so that the text flows right past it. But if I double-click in this text frame to switch to the Type tool, I can drag past it and you'll see that I'm selecting all the text. It jumps right over the image. Now this layout looks pretty good right now, but what if I need to edit the text? It's imperative that the graphic and the caption underneath it stay together. So if I come over here and just grab some text and delete it, well, now we've got problems. The text moved, but the graphic didn't. How can we tell the picture to move along with the text? To do that, we need an inline or anchored object. Let me undo what I just did with a Command-Z or Control-Z on Windows, and I'm going to turn this object, this graphic, into an inline object. To do that, I'm first going to give it its own line to sit on. I'm going to click at the end of this paragraph, and then I'm going to press Return or Enter to make a blank paragraph. I want this graphic to sit on that line, as though it were text. To do that, I'm going to choose the Selection tool, click on the graphic, and cut it to the clipboard by going to the Edit menu and choosing Cut. Next, I'm going to switch back to the Type tool, click inside that blank line, and paste it. When you cut or copy with the Selection tool and then paste with the Type tool, the object becomes an inline object. It's sitting right there on that paragraph. Now, it doesn't look quite right, of course, and that's because this paragraph has absolute leading. I talk about leading in a later chapter, but for right now, I'm just going to point out that I can drag over that whole line with the Type tool. I just selected the whole text, including that graphic, and then I'm going to go up to the Control panel, and I'll make sure that little A is selected. That's the character formatting button, and I'm going to change the leading from this 15 point down to Auto. Auto leading is great for inline objects because it says, take however much space you need. Just move the text around to make it fit. I'm also going to make this paragraph centered by going to the right side of my control panel and clicking on the Align Center button. That looks much better. Now this object is in line, so if I make that same kind of edit, like taking out a bunch of text, it flows with the text. If I add text, I'll just start typing a bunch of gibberish here, you'll see that it moves down with the text. Okay, let's look at another example. I'm going to press Option Page Down or Alt Page Down to jump to the next spread. And I'm going to zoom in on this part of the spread here by holding down the Command spacebar or Control spacebar and dragging over an area. I have an object here in the margin, and I'd like to make that an inline object. I want to put it right here inside this paragraph. I could use that cut and paste method that I just showed you, but I'm going to show you a slightly different method. I'll use the Selection tool and click on that object. And see that little blue box in the upper right corner? I call that the Anchor Me box, and if I hold down the Shift key on my keyboard and drag that object into the text frame, you'll see a dark black line wherever I drag it to. That black line means this is where it's going to be anchored, or placed in line, as soon as I let go of the mouse button. For example, I'm going to put it in front of this word, Flemish. You'll see that immediately it gets anchored. It gets put as an inline object right there. Now, in this case, that object's way too big. Let's resize it to make it smaller. I'll just drag one of these corner handles down until it fits on that line. There we go. Now it looks like a little icon before the word. Now, once again, I'm going to switch back to the Type tool, click in here and type some gibberish, and you'll see that that icon moves with the text. It really is in line. It acts as though it were a single character in the flow. But what if I don't want that object in line, actually in the paragraph? What if I actually did want it out here in the margin? Well, let me show you what to do. I'm going to press Command-Z or Control-Z a few times to go back to where it was before I anchored it. Now I'll use the Selection tool to move this into position. I'll put it right at the top of this paragraph. Now this time, instead of holding down the Shift key while I drag that little Anchor Me box, I'm just going to drag the box itself. I'm dragging with no modifier key. I still get that little black bar, but this time it does something different. I'm going to drag to the left of this T, just before the word the. And when I do that, you'll see that that little blue box changed. Now it's an anchor icon. That anchor icon says that this is an anchored object in the text flow. It's anchored right into that position I placed it, just before that T. While inline objects can only be inside of a text frame, anchored objects can go anywhere I want. I could even drag this anywhere I want. Move it down here, put it on top of the frame, doesn't matter. I'll actually drag it over here so it's covering up some of this text. Now, I obviously don't want it to cover up the text entirely, so I'll go to the Window menu and choose Text Wrap. Let's go ahead and turn on the text wrap for that object. I want the text to flow around this object so that I can see both the icon and the text. But the text wrap is doing something very strange here. This is actually a quirk in InDesign. You just have to understand how it's going to work, and then you can work around it. When you apply a text wrap to an anchored object in InDesign, you have to understand that it only applies to lines after the line that it's anchored in. So in this case, this icon is anchored before the letter T, and so it will not apply to that whole line. It does apply to all the lines after it, but it does not apply to that line or any lines before where it's anchored. So if I want this to work, I need to reposition the anchored object, and I'm going to do that by dragging this little anchor icon out again, and I'm going to put it at the end of the previous paragraph. Now, technically, it's anchored after this word, Ursula, but it's still positioned out here. So as this text is edited, the icon will continue to flow with it, but the text wraps properly. Now, one last thing I should point out about these anchored objects, and that's how to get them unanchored again. To do that, I simply select the anchored object, then I go to the Object menu and choose from the Anchored Object submenu. Here, I'll choose Release. The object is now no longer anchored in the text. Now, there's a lot more that you can do with anchored and inline objects in your documents, but the important thing here is to see that you can quickly set up these kinds of relationships between your text and objects.